The International Monetary Fund has actually raised India's GDP growth projection for 2024-2025 by 30 basis points to 6.8% in its update to the World Economic Outlook, citing buoyant domestic demand. However, the fund's estimate is below the percent growth projection by the government, but global growth projection continues to remain at 3.2% this year and in 2025. Here are the finer details for you. The International Monetary Fund, in its latest Global Economic Outlook report, envisioned 3.2% worldwide growth for the third straight year, with steady growth and slowing inflation, despite supply chain disruptions across the globe. The IMF said that the world is heading towards a soft landing, with 3.2% growth while reining in inflation and producing steady and modest growth. The IMF expects the US economy to grow 2.7% this year, an upgrade from the 2.1% it had predicted in January, and faster than a solid 2.5% expansion in 2023. While economic growth remains strong, many challenges remain for economies across the globe.
The global economy continues to display remarkable resilience, with growth holding steady and inflation declining. But many challenges still lie ahead. Global growth was 3.2% in 2023 and is expected to remain at that level both in 2024 and 2025. This represents a 0.3 percentage point upgrade from our October projections for 2024, with stronger activity than expected in the US, China and other large emerging markets, but weaker activity in the euro area.
Inflation and sharp price rises remain an obstacle for the globe. However, the IMF predicts global inflation tumbling from 6.8% last year to 5.9% in 2024, while in the world's advanced economies alone, inflation is expected to fall to 2.6% this year and 2% in 2025, brought down by the effects of higher interest rates.
Inflation trends are encouraging, but we are not there yet. Somewhat worryingly, progress towards inflation targets has stalled since the beginning of the year in some countries. This could be a temporary setback, but there are reasons to remain vigilant. Oil prices have been rising, in part due to geopolitical tensions, and services inflation remains stubbornly high in many countries.
The IMF raised India's growth projection to 6.8% in its latest report from its January forecast of 6.5%, citing bullish domestic demand conditions and a rising working age population, with India continuing to remain the fastest growing economy of the world, ahead of China's growth projection of 4.6% during the same period. However, growth in emerging and developing Asia is expected to fall from an estimated 5.6% in 2023 to 5.2% in 2024. Despite the world economy's resilient outlook, the IMF has warned that economic growth could be thrown off course by the continuing adverse effects of higher interest rates and geopolitical tensions, including the wars in Ukraine and Gaza, that have threatened to disrupt crucial trade routes, raising energy prices and more. With Disha Bagchi, Parmeshwar Bava for NDTV. And for further clarity on what this means for India and other global economies, we have Girija Pandey joining us live on NDTV 24/7 at the moment. Thank you so much, Mr. Pandey, for making time for us. Well, he's also the former president of Tata Consultancy Services Asia Pacific, part of India's largest business conglomerates. And currently, Mr. Pandey is also the chairman of Apex Avalon Consulting in Singapore. Mr. Pandey, let's dive right in. India is one of the strong performers. This is what the IMF has said. Growth is projected to remain strong at 6.8% this year and 6.5% in 2025. But as an addition, the IMF also said it may revise China's full-year GDP growth forecast upwards after the country reported stronger than expected 5.3% growth for their first quarter. How are you seeing this?
Yes, so the Indian performance is quite stellar. There's clearly no doubt about that. And I think all of us have been watching that growth come on. The China story is a little mixed. And I think the IMF has also mentioned it. And that is precisely because of 3 or 4 reasons. They have a huge debt overhang between the local governments and the property segment. That is a huge overhang, and they need to address that. The second issue is they also have a falling birth rate and aging population, which they need to work out. There is a huge amount of restructuring going on in China. I have done a lot of business in China, and I know some of the challenges that they face. And therefore, I think the IMF has conservatively put their growth at 4.6% rather than the 5% which the government has estimated, or the first quarter number of 5.1%. Because I think the growth is not yet picking up because of some of these drawbacks. And this will take a little while. There is a level of deflation as well that is happening in prices and retail prices. So the Chinese growth, which normally drives the Asian growth, right, because it is the second largest economy in the world, has actually slowed down other parts of Asia as well. India is not so coupled with China. So India is growing on its own steam at 6.5%. So I think that's where we see the Asian story very linked to the Chinese slowdown.
Right. As far as the global economy is concerned, it remains remarkably resilient with steady growth and inflation slowing almost as quickly as it rose. But you know, Mr. Pandey, worryingly, the IMF now estimates that there will be more scarring for low-income developing countries, many of which are still struggling to turn the page from the pandemic and cost of living crisis.
That's true. I think we must remember that the big change, that the reason why the growth is at 3.5 is because the US has performed spectacularly. And no one expected the US growth to be so high. And in a way, because of that, the inflation has not come down to the level we wanted. And that affects every country in the South, in the global South. So you've got 3 or 4 challenges of the global South, which is what is worrying them. One is the supply chain problems because of all the geopolitics that is going on, the oil price, the commodity prices. Second is that the interest rates haven't come down as fast as we expected. And I think in a way, after seeing some of the latest numbers from the US, maybe there will be a little pause before the interest rates are brought down. So unless the Americans bring down the interest rates, the rest of the world has to suffer.
In fact, the Fed chairman also spoke about that. We will get to that later in the bulletin. But as far as this IMF report is concerned, Mr. Pandey, it also warned that while inflation trends are encouraging, the IMF chief economist said that we are not there yet and that medium-term growth prospects remained historically weak.
Yes, there is a pessimism in their forecast for the medium term. There is no doubt. I think there is a lot of issues. We must remember there is a huge climate story that is going on. And the impact of climate. Then there is this impact of inflation, which hasn't yet come down. Then the whole supply chain because of the geopolitics. So there are quite a few imponderables. Until we see a normal trade pattern that was there earlier, we are going to see these anxieties for the medium term. And that's what IMF has projected.
Right. The IMF has stressed the need for huge global investments for a green and climate resilient future in this report as well. Right. Thank you so much, Mr. Girija Pandey, for joining us live on the World 24/7. Really appreciate you making time for us.